I never thought silence could be louder than words. At 71, I sit in the same lounge chair every evening, the one near the window where the light fades slowly. This house is full of voices, footsteps, doors opening and closing, but somehow I feel like a guest who stayed too long. My name is Margaret Hale. I raised 3 children in this very house. I cooked every meal, folded every shirt, stayed awake through fevers and heartbreaks. I was never perfect, but I was always present, or so I thought. It started small, subtle things most people wouldn't notice. Family dinners moved earlier, then later until no one bothered to tell me. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. Decisions were made about my house without asking me. My chair at the table slowly became optional. At first, I made excuses for them. They're busy. They don't mean it. I'm just getting older. That's what women like me do. We soften the truth until it doesn't hurt anyone else. But it hurts us. One evening, I overheard my daughter speaking on the phone in the kitchen. She didn't know I was there. She's old, Mom. She doesn't really need to be involved. It's easier this way. Old, not tired, not fragile, just inconvenient. I stood there, holding a teacup that had gone cold in my hands, realizing something terrifying. I hadn't disappeared overnight. I had slowly been erased. Still, I said nothing, because silence had become my language. I cleaned the house that no longer felt like mine. I smiled when spoken to. I waited for invitations that never came. I told myself love meant endurance. But loneliness has a way of creeping into your bones. One Sunday afternoon, the family gathered in the lounge laughing, planning, talking loudly. I sat in my chair, watching them talk around me. Then my grandson asked, innocently, "Why does Grandma always sit there and never talk?" The room went quiet for just a second. No one answered him. That was the moment I realized something was terribly wrong, not with them, but with me. I had taught them how to treat me. I had taught them that my feelings were optional. That night, I went to my bedroom and opened an old wooden box. Inside were letters, photographs, memories of a woman who once had opinions, dreams, and a voice. I looked at a picture of myself at 40, standing tall, eyes bright, and I whispered, "What happened to you?" For the first time in years, I cried, not because they ignored me, but because I had allowed it for so long. I didn't know it yet, but that night marked the beginning of something dangerous. Not anger, not revenge, but awakening. And once a woman wakes up after decades of silence, there is no going back. But what happened the very next morning would change my family forever, because I finally did something I had never done before. The next morning, I woke before the house stirred. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, landing softly on the floor like it always had. But something inside me felt different, unsettled, alert. The silence that usually wrapped itself around my mornings no longer felt comforting. It felt heavy, unacceptable. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands resting on my knees, breathing slowly. For 71 years, I had learned how to endure, but no one had ever taught me how to demand space. Downstairs, I heard the familiar sounds of life continuing without me. Cabinets opening, coffee pouring, laughter. My daughter's voice, sharp and rushed, discussing plans that didn't include my name. Normally, I would wait. That morning, I didn't. I walked into the kitchen. The room shifted, not dramatically, but enough. Conversations softened. Eyes flickered toward me, then away. My daughter glanced at the clock on the wall. "You're up early," she said. "Yes," I replied. My voice surprised even me. It didn't shake. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, the family table. The chair across from me was empty, but for once, I didn't feel like it belonged to someone else. "I'd like to talk," I said quietly. Silence followed. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that makes people uneasy. My son cleared his throat. "Is everything okay, Mom?" I looked at him, the boy I once rocked to sleep. Now a man who spoke to me like a visitor. I realized something then. They hadn't meant to hurt me. They had simply grown used to my absence. "No," I said honestly. "Everything is not okay." They exchanged glances. I placed my hands flat on the table. "I feel invisible in my own home." My daughter frowned. "Mom, that's not fair. We take care of you." "I didn't say you didn't," I replied. "But being cared for is not the same as being seen." The words hung there. I told them about the dinners I wasn't told about, the decisions made without me, the way conversations stopped when I entered rooms. I spoke calmly, without accusation, but every sentence felt like lifting a stone off my chest. They listened, or at least, they stayed quiet. I stayed silent because I didn't want to be a burden. I continued, "But silence has cost me my dignity." My daughter's eyes filled slightly. "We didn't realize. That's the problem," I said gently. "You didn't have to realize. I should have told you." The room felt smaller, heavier. Finally, my son spoke. "What do you want us to do?" It was a simple question, but it terrified me. What did I want? I had spent decades focusing on everyone else's needs. I had forgotten how to name my own. "I want to be included," I said. "I want to be asked. I want to be heard even when it's inconvenient." No one argued. That afternoon, something changed, but not everything. They tried harder. They spoke to me more. They asked my opinion. But effort does not erase patterns overnight. That evening, as I returned to my lounge chair by the window, I realized something unsettling. Speaking once was not enough, because the real test of respect isn't words spoken in a quiet kitchen. It's what people do when life returns to normal. And I was about to learn whether my voice truly mattered, or if this moment would quietly fade like all the others before it. What happened a few days later made me question whether my family truly heard me, or if I was still invisible, just louder. For a few days after that morning, things felt better. My daughter asked if I wanted tea in the afternoon. My son mentioned dinner plans ahead of time. Even my grandson started greeting me with a smile instead of walking past as if I were part of the furniture. They were trying, and I appreciated that. But effort without understanding is fragile. Slowly, the old rhythm returned quietly, cleverly. Conversations still drifted away when I spoke too long. Decisions were still made quickly, efficiently, without my presence. I was included in form, not in spirit. I began to notice how often people nodded at me without listening, how my suggestions were acknowledged then ignored, how my presence was tolerated but never necessary. One afternoon, I overheard my son talking on the phone in the hallway. "She's sensitive right now," he said. "We just have to be careful for a bit." Careful, not respectful, not mindful. Careful like handling something fragile that might break if touched wrong. That word hurt more than any silence ever had. That evening, I sat alone in the lounge, watching shadows stretch across the walls. The house felt colder than usual. Not physically, emotionally. I asked myself a difficult question. Was I asking for too much? For my generation, women were taught to serve quietly, to be grateful for roofs over their heads, to confuse sacrifice with love. But love, I was beginning to understand, should not erase you. A few days later, the family planned a weekend trip. I found out by accident, overheard laughter, packed bags near the door. "Oh," I said gently, "you're going away?" My daughter froze for just a second. "Yes, just for tonight. We thought you'd be more comfortable staying home." Home, as if this place belonged to me only when they were gone. I nodded, smiled. said nothing. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the house breathe, realizing something important. Being included only when convenient is another form of being ignored. In the early morning hours, I sat up and made a decision that scared me. For the first time in decades, I would stop waiting for permission. The next day, while they were busy preparing for their trip, I did something they never expected. I made a phone call. My old friend Eleanor answered on the third ring. "Margaret?" she said, surprised. "Is everything all right?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think it's time I found out." We talked for an hour about life, about regrets, about how women disappear without noticing. When I hung up, my hands were shaking, but my heart felt steady. Later that afternoon, I packed a small bag. Nothing dramatic, just enough for a few days. When my daughter noticed, her eyes widened. "Mom, what are you doing?" "I'm going away," I said calmly. "Just for a bit." Her face filled with confusion and fear. "Where?" I looked at her, truly looked at her, and realized this was the first time she had seen me not as someone who stayed, but someone who could leave. "You'll know soon enough," I said softly, and for the first time in my life, I chose uncertainty over invisibility. But my leaving would trigger a reaction I never expected and force my family to finally confront what they had done. I didn't tell them where I was going, not because I wanted to punish them, but because I needed space that belonged only to me. Space where my silence wouldn't be mistaken for agreement. Eleanor lived 2 hours away, in a small town that smelled of fresh bread and rain-soaked streets. Her house was modest, filled with books and quiet corners. When she opened the door and pulled me into a hug, something inside me loosened. "You don't look broken," she said softly. "You look tired." That was the truth. For the first day, I did nothing. No cooking, no cleaning, no waiting to be noticed. I sat by the window, drank tea, and listened to the sound of my own thoughts. Back home, the house felt my absence immediately. My daughter called that evening. "Mom, are you okay?" "Yes," I said, and for the first time, it was honest. There was a pause. We didn't realize how much she did. I didn't respond, because realization is only the first step. The next morning, my son called. "The house feels strange," he admitted. "Too quiet." I closed my eyes. It's always been quiet for me. Silence followed. Days passed. At Eleanor's, I laughed. I told stories. I remembered who I was before I became convenient background noise. We walked in the mornings, sat on the porch in the evenings. For the first time in years, no one spoke over me. Meanwhile, at home, things began to unravel, not dramatically, but meaningfully. Meals were late. Small arguments broke out. My grandson asked where I was every night. "She'll be back soon," my daughter said, but her voice lacked certainty. On the fourth day, my daughter arrived unannounced at Eleanor's door. She looked shaken. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. "The house doesn't feel like home without you." I studied her face, tired, confused, humbled. "I didn't leave to be missed," I said gently. "I left to remember myself." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry." I believe she meant it. But apologies are easy. Change is not. "I need to know something," I said. "Do you want me in your life, or just in your house?" She didn't answer right away, and that pause told me everything. That night, I lay awake again, but this time, I wasn't afraid. I realized something powerful. Being needed is not the same as being valued. The next morning, I made a decision that would redefine my place in that family forever. I picked up the phone, and what I said next would force them to see me not as an obligation, but as a woman with a choice. The call I made that morning would change my family's future and my own in ways none of us were prepared for. I held the phone in my hand for a long moment before dialing. My fingers trembled not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to do. For decades, I had allowed others to decide where I belonged. This call would change that. When my son answered, his voice sounded relieved. Mom, we've been worried. I know, I said calmly. That's why I'm calling. I didn't waste time. I won't be coming back the way things were. There it was. Silence on the other end. What do you mean? He asked carefully. I continued. If I return, it will be as someone included in decisions, respected in conversations, and treated as part of this family, not as a quiet presence in the corner. He exhaled slowly. Mom, we never meant. I know, I interrupted gently, but intention doesn't erase impact. Later that day, I asked them all to meet my daughter, my son, even my grandson. We sat around Eleanor's small dining table. No distractions, no phones, just truth. I love you, I began. But love without respect slowly becomes loneliness. My daughter cried openly. My son stared at his hands. I'm not asking to be the center of your lives, I said. I'm asking not to disappear inside them. I laid out simple boundaries. I would be informed, not assumed. I would be heard, not tolerated. I would have a say in matters that affected my life. And then I said the sentence that changed everything. If that's too much, I will build a life elsewhere. No threats, no anger, just clarity. They didn't argue, because for the first time, they understood something terrifying. I could leave. The days that followed were careful but sincere. Not perfect but honest. They called, not to check on me, but to talk. They asked my opinion and waited for the answer. They listened without rushing to respond. After a week, I returned home, but I didn't return to the same place. My chair at the table was there waiting. My name was included in plans. My voice carried weight, and I noticed something else. My grandson watched me differently now. One evening, he climbed onto my lap and whispered, "Grandma, you're brave." I smiled, because bravery isn't loud. Sometimes it's just refusing to disappear. Still, part of me wondered, was this change real or temporary? Respect can be fragile when it's new, and I knew the final test was still ahead. But one final moment would reveal whether my family had truly changed, or if I was about to face the hardest choice of all. Change doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly through small, consistent actions, through listening instead of interrupting, through asking instead of assuming. Weeks passed after I returned home, and slowly, carefully, my family began to prove something I wasn't sure they could. They remembered to ask. They waited for my answers. They adjusted plans when I spoke, not out of guilt but respect. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, my daughter paused mid-conversation and turned to me. "Mom, what do you think?" It was such a small question, but it felt like a door opening. I shared my thoughts. No one rushed me. No one corrected me. They listened. And for the first time in years, I felt present not as a responsibility, but as a person. Later that night, I returned to my lounge chair by the window, the same chair where I once felt invisible. The moonlight rested gently on the floor, and I realized something had changed inside me too. I no longer needed permission to exist. Respect had grown, but so had my boundaries. I spoke up sooner now. I didn't wait until hurt turned into silence. I had learned that love does not require erasure. One afternoon, my grandson brought home a school project. He had drawn our family around the dining table. Every chair was filled, including mine. He looked up at me proudly. "I made sure you were there." I swallowed hard, because children notice what adults normalize. That was when I knew the cycle had shifted, not just for me, but for the generations after me. That evening, my daughter sat beside me on the couch. "I didn't realize how strong you are," she said quietly. I smiled. I didn't either. The truth is, I had always been strong. I just forgot. Now, I understand something deeply important. You teach people how to treat you not through anger, but through presence, through voice, through the courage to leave if necessary. I still sit in my chair by the window, but now I choose it not because there's nowhere else for me to be, but because it's where I like the light. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: you're never too old to take your place at the table. And once you do, you should never give it back. If this story touched you, remember your voice matters. At any age, subscribe the channel for more heart-touching true stories.